Alright, so today we're going to start with the motor stick and tail boom. You've got a few decisions to make. How long do you want the motor stick, and what diameter mandrel do you want, and some of that depends on what the thickness of your balsa wood is. So this one is labeled as 014 thickness. And I'm just going to double check it. Well, it looks like it's 014. Yeah, it looks like it's 014. Pretty accurate. So my previous one was 0145, and one of the notes I've got on it was not quite flexible enough in torsion at Kibbe. So I'm going to go with the 004. Typically 0013 with an 8 or 9 inch motor stick on a 6mm mandrel gives you about the right torsion. But I found the 013 tended to be a little tough for kids to work with. A lot of broken motor sticks. So we went up to the 014 and actually had 0145 as our stock, and that ended up being a little stiff. So we've gone down in diameter to 7/32. That almost did the job. And then we went from an 8-inch long motor stick to a 9-inch motor stick. That increases the hook to hook from 7 to 8 inches. We found that can help a little bit with late flight torque. But it also gives more twist end to end, just a little bit more twist, and that will help. And then we're going slightly thinner. This is 4.66 pounds per cubic foot. So we're going to make the 9-inch long motor stick. And then the other thing you've got to decide on is how you want to wrap it. You can make a template to exactly cut the width of your piece at 0.754 inches, and that'll wrap around a 7/32 inch brass tubing just perfectly. My preferred method is to make it a little wider, overlap it as you wrap it, and then cut through both layers. And that gives you a perfect joint along the length. Either method works fine. So let's set up to cut this. So sometimes the end isn't perfectly clean. We're going to actually measure it maybe 1/10 of an inch long, and that'll give us a little option to, I'm just going to go 1/2 tenth extra, little option to clean it up if necessary later. So we're just going to make a little mark on there at the 9.05 distance. And then here's a neat trick. I forget who showed this, maybe Kang Lee in his F1D blog. But to accurately mark your wood, take your blade and just color on it with a Sharpie. And you don't want it to dry too much. Get your ruler, and we're going to come out 0.9 inches. So get it as close to the edge as possible, and then just put a little cut at 0.9 inches, and that leaves a mark just as wide as your blade. So it's a lot finer of a mark than you're going to get with any kind of magic marker. Okay, so we've got 2 marks there. Now we can lay our straight edge on here. Double check, measure twice, cut once. clamping down on your board and keeping your blade very vertical side to side so you don't get an angled cut. Not quite so important here because we're going to do the overlap cut. And come out to about where my marks are here. And then this is a nice square end on this. This is a piece of 1/8 inch acrylic. And it's actually a cutting guide for a 1/4 inch diameter form on the motor stick. So it's about 0.85 inches wide. Okay, so that's our blank for the motor stick. Let's cap my marker so we don't dry that out. This was, I already recorded the source. It was batch 10, sheet 6, 10-06. Density was 4.66. So we cut our blank out of that. I want to go to my record sheets here and make a note. That was 10-06 Chuck motor stick. And this is in 6 of 25, and so we're going to have about 80% of that remaining. Okay, so just update your inventory. Now we're going to mass that blank. Now the blank is a little larger than we're actually going to use for the airplane, so the blank will be on the heavy side, but we're still going to record what it is before shaping and trimming. $143. All right, now while we're doing that, the tail boom is very similar, so we're going to go ahead and get that prepped. Now I've already got a tail boom cut here. This happened to be cut previously by me, but I will go over some of the details of cutting that. Okay, this is a tail boom cutting template, and it is sized for the Ray Harlan tail boom form, and so we need to cut it exactly on both edges from the sheet. Now if you've got a wide enough sheet, and this is 14,000, so I'm not going to actually cut it, you can actually get possibly 3 tail booms out of a sheet. I think I normally get 2, but let's see. That takes me to there, to there, to there. I think you're going to be hard pressed to get 3 out of it, but you might if you bias it toward one end with the fat end and you align it with the edge. So the grain isn't straight down the middle, but I haven't had an issue with having the grain follow one edge. And when you set this up, you're going to clamp down as best you can and not let it move. You're going to cut one side and keep clamping down and cut the other side. And it's critical that you keep the blade vertical against the plastic guide. But you want to cut both sides. You don't want to just line up the guide with the edge of the wood because it might have a little bit of waviness to it. It might not be a clean cut. And to get it sized exactly by this template, you want to go ahead and cut both sides. If you're lucky, you can get 3 pieces out of a piece of wood. If you're not going to get 3, you might as well go straight down the middle, or straight with the grain, and have the grain go with the center of the template. But just make sure you're clamping all the time. You can get somebody to help you. Cut both sides without letting it move. Cut the ends off, and you're good. This form is about an inch shorter than my sheet, so the form is 18 inches, the sheet's 19. If you've got longer sheets like this, you can go ahead and make a longer tail boom. That's trending right now. Some significantly longer tail booms, or you can make your extension a little bit long. So that's what we did to get this tail boom sheet. I'm not going to cut it on video here because I've already got it cut. Just happen to have one in my inventory that I cut in a previous session. Alright, but we will mass it. And sometimes you gotta do some tricks to mass it because it's bending so much. There we go, 136. So let's record that. Tail boom. .136. And let's just check that against some previous. That's a little bit heavy. My last one was 106. So actually I think we're gonna, because that's 136, it's about 30 milligrams heavier than my last one. I'm gonna look through my stock and see if I can get another sheet. I'm gonna pause this for a moment. Okay, after much contemplating, I've selected this sheet. It's a 009. It came out to about 5 pounds. It's a little heavier than I want, but it's so humid lately that might be impacting it. So here I'm cutting the leftover at the edge of the sheet. Just to, and it clearly wasn't straight. And then I'll cut across here and drop the blade to a low angle to cut across. And then keeping the blade vertical all the time. Trying to keep some pressure on the template. Alright, let's see where we're at with that. Let's see, the one we tried before was 136 milligrams. We'll see if this is lighter. We'll pick the lightest of the two. So it was labeled 4 to 4.5 pound wood, but it massed out at about 5 pounds. Alright, that's, well, it read 127 to start with. $128. and the other was 136. So we'll go with this. There's not much difference there, but this also mic'd out at about 9.5 thousandths thick instead of 9, and that likely is due to the humidity. So yeah, you work with what you got, and I think this will be a good piece. So let's record that. Alright, what do I do with my record here? Alright, tail boom. That was sorry about this. We'll call it just 901. Batch 9, sheet 01, density 5.0, weight we said was 128. Tail boom chuck 6 of 25, number 6. Alrighty, we'll go with that. I'll put my sheets away in just a minute. Next step is going to be to soak these in water. So that's behind the camera. Move the camera back here. We need a little bit more water in the trough. And then motor stick. And tail boom. If you can submarine it under, it's not quite as fragile as the 25,000 square sticks. So we want that in there for about 10 minutes. Meanwhile, we'll get everything else set up for wrapping those. So I'm going to work on putting away the balsa. I'm going to pause this for about 10 minutes and we'll come back to wrapping. Alright, it's been a few minutes, not quite long enough yet, but we're going to get prepped here. You can use tissue. This is double-aught silk span. This is old-fashioned double-aught silk span. You can't get it anymore. The stuff they sell today as double-aught silk span is absolute junk. So my motor stick is 9 inches long. I'm going to cut a piece of tissue or silk span 10 inches long. If you think of it as 1/4 inch, 3 times that, so one wrap around would be about 3/4 inch. You need at least 2 wraps around, which would be 1.5 inches. So we're going to go a little over 2 inches. That'll give us 3 wraps around. So I'm going to set my 2-inch wide straight edge on there. It looks like I've cut this sheet before at this width, so that's what we'll do. Alright, this will, because we're using the overlap method, this will be a sacrificial sheet. Let's see if I can find a, well, I'll just take that tape off. That's tape left over from cutting rubber, I believe. Alright, so you're going to get yourself a sponge, and it shouldn't be dripping wet, just good and wet, not dripping all over the place. We're just going to wet out our tissue. Now you want to make sure your tissue has some wet strength, so if you're not able to find silk span, then a good Jap tissue. I've been thinking about trying some Kim wipes. They're tissue wipes for the lab, for chemistry, and they seem to have some wet strength, so I've been thinking about trying those on this. So I've wet it out and I've pulled it to the edge of the table, and now I'm going to take my form, 7/32 brass tubing, and put it near the edge and just brush up the edge of the tissue onto the form using my thumb as a brush. And once you've got it stuck on, just give it a slight tug back, and that will get all the wrinkles out and get it straight on here. And it's basically straight down, the edge is straight down the tube, and I've got about a half a wrap on. The more you wrap under the balsa, the bigger your diameter is going to be, and you don't want that. So we're just going to wrap it halfway around, and then we're going to take our sheet out of the water. Hopefully it's been in there long enough. And we're going to stand it up against the brass tubing, get it lined up, and then let it drop as you start to roll the tubing. Now I'm rolling it, but I'm keeping tension back toward myself so the tissue is tight to the balsa wood as you go around. Now I get a half a wrap on, and I want to make sure that that edge of the balsa is straight, and it looks pretty good. So we're going to continue around, and there it just bumped up, so we definitely got an overlap. We got quite an overlap here. It looks like a good 1/8 of an inch, 3 or 4 millimeters. Normally when I'm doing this, I will have gotten some blue tape out. That's not long enough. A couple of 2-inch pieces on the table. Probably 3 of them is enough for the motor stick. And find where that edge was and wrap the tape and just make a flag out of it. So that just keeps it from unraveling as you dry it. Now we're going to dry these in the toaster oven at about 200 degrees F, and about 20 minutes. That works fine on this metal form. If you have a plastic form or something, you may not be able to go to that temperature. You can also let it dry overnight, whatever it takes. So let's do that, and we're going to do the same thing with the tail boom form. Now on the tail boom form, since we cut it to exactly meet up, we end up being able to reuse our silk span at least a few times. It may start getting a little raggy. This looks okay, and I cut a slight taper on it because this end will be your skinny end, and it's got 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 inch width. And then as you get down to the fat end, we're going to be up around 2 1/4 inches wide. Again, not terribly wet, but wet enough. That could probably use just a little more water. Okay, there we're getting it good and wet. And this tissue is also set a little bit longer than the blank will be. Here's our form. Actually, it's pretty close to the form length, so not a lot of spare there. You might want a little bit more. Get it straight with the edge of the table. A kitchen counter works nice for this as well. All right, we're good to go there. Now we're going to take our tail boom form, and now since the edges matched exactly, we're not going to be cutting on the form, and so we don't want the edges to overlap at all. We want to get the general curvature right, but we can go ahead and put on a full wrap of tissue underneath the balsa just to make sure the ends don't meet. So we're going to do the same thing we did on the motor stick form. We're going to get it on here and then pull straight back a little just to get all the wrinkles out, get it straight, make sure there's no wrinkles on the board here. Make sure your edge of your tissue is straight down the form, and then we're going to complete the first wrap. So we got one full wrap of tissue on the form. Now we're going to get our balsa wood sheet out of the water. I think the form's 18.5 inches long. Maybe 18.25. All right, so we're standing up our balsa, get it square on the form, and then start to roll, and that'll knock it down. Make sure it's straight. Start rolling. Again, keeping pressure downward and back toward yourself. Get half a wrap on and make sure the line is going straight down the form. That looks pretty good. And as it comes around to the end of the wood, make sure you don't have a step there. Looks like we've got perhaps a hair of overlap. So I'm going to unwrap it there. Yeah, I don't want that wiggle or step in the balsa wood, so we're just going to be extra cautious here. We're going to lift up the balsa, and we're going to go another half wrap or so on here. Get a little more tissue under the balsa. I'm starting to get to where our tissue might not be wide enough. And we'll maybe shift the balsa toward the fat end of the form just a hair. Flops down, half a wrap, looks pretty good. I think we're okay that time. Yeah, I'm not feeling a lump as there's a little lump in the middle. I think we're okay though. All right. Again, you could have your tape already prepped. I usually use 4 pieces on the tail boom. All right, off to the toaster oven to dry these out. Probably 20 to 30 minutes at 200 will do the job. And we'll be back. Alrighty, so we've got the motor stick here, nice and dry. So we're going to cut off the blue tape carefully without cutting your balsa, one piece at a time. And we want to keep it wrapped up because we still got to tape it, but the blue tape doesn't cut. I mean, we got to cut it. The blue tape doesn't cut all that well. So we're going to reseal it with Scotch tape. Scotch tape doesn't work so well with water, so that's why we use the blue tape to begin with. And you take it off in the direction that it's wrapped so you don't tear the tissue or anything. And just replace it with some Scotch tape, using Scotch magic tape. Something nice and thin that cuts easily. Alright, now, let's see if I have a fine line marker here, 005, that'll work. If we look at this, we can see here is the edge of the overlap. Then the back edge of the overlap, where it first starts overlapping, is about there. We want to cut through both pieces of wood. So we're going to want to cut right in the middle between where it steps up and where the wood ends. So we put a little mark there just so we can keep track. And now we got a little bit of setup to do. We're going to need this is my boron board, so we've got this piece of aluminum 1/8 inch thick by 1/2 inch wide aluminum flat iron there, and we'll put the motor stick right against that with the mark where we're going to cut straight up. I'm going to take my thicker straight edge and put it against that motor stick, and that just kind of locks it in place there. If you want, you can tape that down just to keep it from scooting on you. Now you're going to take your 2-inch straight edge and you're going to lay that right on where that mark is and make sure it's parallel to the tube there. This one you definitely want to tape down, and we're making it like a hinge here. Double check, make sure it's straight. Doesn't look quite straight. I think our bottom ruler is moving a little bit. Get a fresh piece of tape on that. Alright, and we hinge this over, make sure it's straight with the tube. Looks pretty good. Now here's where you want a really sharp blade. You don't want a well-used blade, you want to get a fresh blade out, because we're going to make a pass. We're going to clamp down with this and we're going to make a pass and cut through the tape, the tissue, and both layers of balsa in one pass. If you have to make multiple passes, you're not going to get it the same. You've got to keep this thing vertical, and you don't want too tall of an angle on your cutting so it doesn't tear, but it slices. So we get it at the beginning here, dig in, and just a steady motion with a good downward force so that we're cutting through everything. You can see I'm off by maybe 1/2 millimeter to 1 millimeter from my mark, but my my wood gap was, my wood overlap was about 3 millimeters wide, so I think we're okay there. Now we can carefully unwrap, and we can see the scrap piece of the balsa. We can see the tissue. That was the first layer. Now we're down to the keepable wood. So the best thing at this point is slip the metal tube out. There's another outer wrap, and then we got tissue on the inside. And you've got a small sliver of balsa on the inside. Now sometimes this is a little bit stuck, so be patient with it, don't force it. If you can get one end started, you can pull it out through the gap. And that's our scrap of balsa. It's about 1.5 millimeters wide, so we hit the seam just right. And there's our cut tube. We can get rid of this tissue. We won't need it anymore. And I always put my tube back on the form. Alright, so we'll come back to that in just a minute. We're going to take a look at the tail boom. Now remember, on the tail boom, we measure, or we cut it with a template so it's exact width, so we don't need to play games with cutting it. Alright, that tissue is getting a little bit old there. It's probably done about 10 tail booms, so it's probably time to retire it. But again, if you take it off in the direction the tissue is wrapped, you won't pull up that edge and ruin the tissue for future use. We might get another use out of it, who knows. Okay, sorry about that interruption. Alright, so we've got the pieces of tape off. Now we'll just carefully unwrap the tissue. Yeah, I think that tissue's at end of life there. And then the tissue at some point ducks under the balsa wood there. So be careful you don't rip it all off and break the balsa wood. But at that point, you can, once you've got it down to the opening in the balsa wood, you can start sliding it off the skinny end. Well, not quite coming there. Make sure it's released. Yeah, slide the wood off the skinny end of the form while you're holding the tissue and the form together. So there's your nicely formed tail boom piece. Set aside your tissue in case you can salvage that. Throw out the tape. And quickly go ahead and put your wood back on the form. That just minimizes the chances that it's going to get crushed.